Hi guys, welcome to the Studios. Compliments of the seasons to my good listeners. Let's wrap up API utilities with Retrofit. We've talked about the RS Java 1, RS Java 2. This time we'll be looking at a library called Guava. Guava is a set of core libraries that include new collection types such as multi-part and multi-set, immutable collections, a graph library, functional types, and in-memory cache, and APIs utilities for concurrency, I/O, hashing, primitives, reflection, string processing, and much more. So we have a lot to talk about when it comes to Guava. But basically on this video, we'll be integrating our Guava library adapter with Retrofit. So we just replaced the typical API calls with Guava. So I'm actually going to be building on the source code we had on the video RS Java on Android using Recycler View. So we're going to be integrating the Guava implementation as the API call. Heading straight to Android Studio, you only need to add a few dependencies. Firstly, you add the Guava dependency to Android, which you have right there, the compile, Guava 23.0 Android, and the adapter. If you notice, we've mentioned the RS Java adapter with Retrofit and the 1 point and the 2 point series. We're actually going to use the Guava library, which also has an inbuilt adapter with Retrofit. So with that two in the dependencies, you're good to go. So just sync Gradle and set up to the activity. Now, before I head straight to the main activity, I would like to look at the client where we get to call the build and the base URL. We're actually not going to be using the out-of-the-box client as a class. We'll be embedding it with the main activity. So that still stays. Looking at the GitHub service, we have to actually change a few things. We need to call the listenable future. That's the implementation we need instead of the IO reactivex or the observable for the RS Java 1. We need to point at the listenable future, which is actually coming from the Google common, the util concurrent from the concurrency library of Google. So we point down to the get start repositories where we pass the username as a parameter to actually search the whole repository of a particular user. So cool. Heading straight to main activity, I decided to comment out the RS Java 1, the RS Java 2 implementation, and I leave out the Guava setup. So it's just basically simple, just the way we've actually understood how to call data using the Retrofit implementation. So we're actually going to call the Retrofit builder rather than the get start repos that takes in a username as a parameter. You instantiate that and call the builder to that. You set up the base URL. That's why we didn't actually use the client. So we're actually embedding it right inside the main activity. You point out at the base URL, and that's something very important, which is predominant to different API setup. This is the Guava call adapter factory. The other time we talk about the RS Java adapter. So we're actually using the Guava here. You call the JSON converter factory and create up an object of the builder. So we get to use the builder to build up and have a Retrofit object to use, which we're going to use to create the GitHub service, which has the endpoint to the API. So you have that set up. Cool. Now let's look at the way we're going to actually get the start repositories and pass the username. Now we call on the listenable future. The listenable future is a class which is actually predominant to the Guava library that actually helps to call data concurrently right there in the background thread without blocking the UI. Cool. And you pass in the response. This is a Retrofit response. Calling on the list, we need a list util, and the GitHub repo. It's going to be the generic class, which actually has the model, the data in question. So we have an object called the listenable future. This is actually going to take up all the data, which is actually going to, that is the endpoint and the base URL now, which is the get start repositories and the username. So we have an object of the GitHub service that actually build up the link which we are going to actually call data from. Now you need to create a try and catch block. Within this block, that's where you get to get the response, the success response, and the catch. You need to catch for some exception. That's some error that might trigger. The exception might be an interrupted exception or an execution exception. So those are the two likely patches or exception that could be triggered while calling the Guava library. Now in the try, for the first try block, we have the response and the list, passing that into the Pojo we have. And now I want you to look at something closely. We now have a listenable feature that could get data. So that's why you have the get method, get data. We're not posting, we're getting. So we have that set up. So we are passing all that data into the response object, which is a retrofit object that houses all those data. So now how are we going to actually decompile this and make it more readable? You're going to have a list, typically list approach, which definitely you might instantiate with an array list. And now what I want you to look closely now is the response you're having, which is the bunch of data, and the body of the data. You're actually getting that as a whole. So you're actually passing that to a list array, which you have it as the GitHub repos. So this is what will be used to actually set to the GitHub repos method we have right there in the GitHub repo adapter. We have that method. If you notice, the set GitHub repos. So we have that right there that actually takes up the list of the GitHub repo based on the data format we have set up for it. So it's actually going to consume that and set that up to the adapter for display. So you have that. So that's just how to actually get that set up. The main aspect here is the recycler adapter calling the set GitHub repos and passing the object, which is the bunch of data, as a list down to the recycler adapter for display. Can you see how Guava actually makes its own call more simpler and shorter with a try and catch to actually make that actually scalable. Now you have a listenable feature. That feature is very important. It actually gets the call, and it's from the Google concurrent library, which is actually housed of the Guava library as well. So with this, we've wrapped up how we're actually going to use API utilities with Retrofit. You could use RSJava 1, RSJava 2, the Guava library to actually make a more robust call to data from different APIs. So cool. With this, we've finalized the Retrofit API course, and we'll be moving to other implementation of Android libraries and so on in subsequent videos. Thank you guys for hanging out with me throughout this tutorial, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel. From here, I'll say have a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. Bye bye.